Hello, and now we're moving to loop statements. Like I explained in some videos before here, loop statements are just help you to write some certain logic that you want to get repeated for a certain number of times. There are cases where you would want a group of code to run multiple times, and rather than duplicating those code, which would be very ineffective, you can write some conditions that will make that code to be repeated. And one of the ways you can do this is using a for loop. Okay, and like the name loop suggests, it means something comes over uh, and over again as many times as needed. So how does a for loop look like? I'll be providing you the structure of a for loop. As usual, I will put this in a comment so that it doesn't get executed. Now your for loop looks like this. You have for, which is a keyword, open bracket, you do an initialization, semicolon, you have a condition, semicolon, you do an increment, then you can close your bracket. Now you open braces, close brace, and as with most other stuff, between the braces you have your statements. This is how a for loop looks like. So how does this look like in actual code? I will just do a simple counter where we count maybe from 1 to 10 or 1 to any number, but I'll just do from 1 to 10. So 4. Now remember, understanding the basic structure will help you know how to replicate this or do more. That is why I usually provide the structure. So if you know the structure and you know how each of these parts work, then you can also create a new for loop by yourself. So I will be explaining what each of this contains and how they make the for loop work. So we've had our bracket here for open bracket, and the first thing we need is initialization. Now what's initialization? Well, very easy. We're just creating a variable. Okay, so the same way you've always created a variable, we just put it in here. So var let me call the variable counter equals to we can start from, let's start from 1 in this case. You can start from any number you want, and semicolon, just like the structure states. Space. The next thing we need is our condition, and if you can remember your if statements, you can put like similar conditions that we use in an if statement here. And but in this case, the condition I want to use is since we want to go from 1 to 10, I would say for when this variable counter is less than or equals to 10. Remember, less than or equals to, right? So if counter is less than or equals to 10, okay, that's my condition. Semicolon. The next is our increment, and our increment is basically how do we want counter to be increased. So you can do something like counter is equals to counter plus 1. Okay, so this means if counter is 0, 0 plus 1 becomes 1, counter becomes 1. If it's 1, 1 plus 1 becomes 2, and counter becomes 2. Okay, so we can easily do this. A shorthand of doing this same thing is just to do counter plus plus. So what does this do? Whatever the value of counter is, add 1 to it. So if it's 0, becomes 1. If it's 1, it becomes 2, and so on. So both of these are actually the same thing. This is just a shorter version, and I think I want to use a shorter version. So get rid of that, and in here we have counter plus plus. Basically add 1 to counter, and that is our increment. Remember, it's the same with the other, which is counter equals to counter plus 1. So I could have also used that here. It would still work. Alright, so the next thing is our statement, and our statements are, well, just lines of code that you want to run, and we can use what we've been using before now, and I just want to do a document dot write line to print to the screen. And what I want to print to the screen is the value of counter. So counter is a variable, and we can actually just print out the value to the screen. And anything else, you can have as many lines of code here as you want, but I'm just using one for now. All right, so document the write line counter. I should save that, and when I refresh, notice that 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 from just this one line of code. Now, if how we've been writing code before now, if we needed to do this, we would have needed to write document the write line 1, document the write line 2, document the write line 3, and so forth. But now with just this line of code, we've been able to say write this 10 times, and we just have one line of code printing out 1 to 10. We could even go higher. Let's go to 50. Okay, so long as counter is less than or equals to 50. If I should save this, refresh, look at that. We've counted up to 50 just with a few lines of code. So what happens here? Counter is our variable, which I said is like our initialization, and we're saying we want to start from this value 1, and we're saying as long as the value 1 is less than or equals to 50. And notice that's why we stop at 50, because we want it to be less than or equal to 50. Provided this is still true, increase this by 1. So what happens? Let me take it back to 10. Okay, what happens? So we start, counter is equals to 1. All right, now we check, is counter less than 10? And notice in this case it is 1. So it's 1 less than or equal to 10. Well, yes, 1 is less than or equal to 10. So we do the document the write line counter, and we print out 1 because counter is currently 1. So that's why we see 1 on the screen. And finally, we increase this counter by 1, and counter becomes 2. We do our condition again. Is 2 less than or equals to 10? Yes, it is. We print it to the screen, and we increase this to become 3. We go on and go on and go on until it becomes 10. We print 10, increase this to 11, and now it's 11 less than or equal to 10. Nope, that's false, because 11 is greater than 10, and the loop ends there, and we exit the loop. And that's how you get 1 to 10 using a for loop. So you can see that for loops are actually interesting, and you can imagine the amount of logic that you can do with this by adding some more conditions and some extra lines of code into this space. But I'm just trying to introduce for loops to you and how they work. So this is okay for now. From what I've explained, just try to write a for loop, maybe do something from 1 to 20, I don't know, without looking at this code, but just use the structure and see if you can come up with a for loop of your own.